My name is Hannah Carter, and 3 days before my wedding, my world turned upside down. I was 28 years old, about to marry the man I believed was my soulmate, and I thought nothing could shatter the joy of that moment. But then it happened. His parents, Richard and Victoria, sat across from me in their glittering estate and delivered words that still echo in my chest. Sign this prenuptial agreement today, or the wedding is off. The paper they slid across the table was thick, its pages bound in polished blue leather. At first glance it looked professional, maybe even standard. But when I opened it, my blood ran cold. Every clause screamed imbalance. If I divorced their son even after decades together, I would leave with nothing. Not the condo we had chosen, not a share in anything we built together, not even security for my business ideas. My intellectual property, my company, my very future could fall under their control. In that moment, I understood what they saw when they looked at me. Not a woman in love with their son, not a partner ready to build a life. To them, I was a liability, a middle-class girl from a modest neighborhood who had somehow slipped into their world of endless manicured lawns and polished family crests. In their eyes, I had nothing to protect, nothing worth mentioning, nothing that mattered. But they were wrong. Behind my quiet life, behind my modest car and practical apartment, lay a truth they had no clue about. I was not penniless. I was not helpless. I was the owner of a successful technology company and the heir to my grandfather's wise investments. My net worth was $9 million, and every dollar of it had been earned or grown by my own determination. Yet in that instant, I kept silent. I let their smug expressions hang in the air, their confidence filling the room like smoke. They thought I would crumble. They thought I would sign away my future just to hold on to their son. They had no idea who I really was. As I sat there, heart-pounding hands tight around the folder, I realized this was not only about marriage. This was about freedom. This was about respect. This was about refusing to let someone else write the script of my life. Because sometimes the most dangerous mistake people make is underestimating the quiet woman across the table. And I was about to show them just how costly that mistake could be. That was the beginning of the storm. But before I tell you how I fought back, let me pull you into my world. Let me show you where I came from, the life I built, and why I was never the gold digger they thought I was. Because my story isn't just about love and betrayal, it's about standing up when powerful people expect you to kneel. The morning after that confrontation, I woke up with the weight of their ultimatum still pressing on my chest. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their smug faces, the way Victoria's lips curled when she said, "If you love him, you'll understand. Sign it, or the wedding is off." I remember standing at my kitchen counter, clutching a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, staring out the window at the Chicago skyline. The city was waking up, buses, rolling horns, honking, lives moving forward. And yet my life felt paused, suspended in this impossible moment. Was I supposed to give away everything I had worked for just to satisfy their arrogance, or was I supposed to walk away from the man I loved, humiliating myself and destroying everything we had built together? That is the question that tears at you when people underestimate your worth. It's not just about the papers you're asked to sign. It's about dignity. It's about identity. And that is what they were trying to strip from me. But here's the truth I need you to hear. Standing your ground will always be harder than giving in. It demands courage. It demands clarity. It demands the willingness to lose something precious in order to protect something even greater yourself. I knew then that I couldn't let their threats dictate my choices. Before I dive further into what came next, let me pause for a moment because I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where someone looked at you and decided you were worth less than you knew yourself to be? If you have, I want you to share it in the comments below. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button and stay with me. Because what happened after that ultimatum is proof that underdogs can fight back and win. The irony was that to the world, I looked like exactly the kind of woman they assumed I was. I lived in a modest apartment, drove a practical car, wore clothes that were stylish but never extravagant. To them, these were signs of lack. To me, they were choices. I wanted to build my life on purpose, not appearances. I wanted to succeed because of what I created, not because of the numbers in my account. And maybe in some twisted way that disguise had worked against me. I had hidden too well. I had kept my inheritance, my company, my wealth so carefully guarded that when the moment came, they thought they were holding all the cards. They believed I had nothing to protect, no leverage to fight back with. But I did. That was the moment the seed of resistance took root in me. I wasn't going to fold, not this time. As I set the empty coffee cup down, I knew two things. First, I loved Ethan, and I still wanted to marry him. Second, I would not do it by surrendering myself to his family's control. Those two truths felt like they were pulling me in opposite directions. But maybe, just maybe, they could coexist. Maybe I could protect both my love and my freedom. Maybe this was the test of whether Ethan and I were truly ready for a life together. I decided that morning I would fight. I would fight with intelligence, with strategy, and with truth. And if that wasn't enough to keep Ethan, then maybe he was never mine to begin with. The Blackwoods thought their ultimatum was the end of the story. For me, it was only the beginning. I grew up in a neighborhood where people didn't wear designer suits or drive luxury cars. My parents were both high school teachers in Chicago. They taught history and literature, and every day they came home with stacks of papers to grade. We didn't have much money, but we had books, long dinner conversations, and the unshakable belief that hard work mattered more than family names. From the time I was a little girl, I understood that if I wanted something, I had to earn it. College wasn't going to be handed to me. Every scholarship dollar was carved out of sleepless nights spent with textbooks, practice tests, and the determination to never give up. My parents could not afford tuition, but they gave me something more valuable: discipline and grit. By the time I walked across the stage at Northwestern University with honors in computer science, I wasn't just proud of the degree. I was proud of every late night, every rejected application that turned into an acceptance, every challenge I had crushed on my own terms. That degree was more than paper. It was proof that no one could tell me where I belonged. But life wasn't only about textbooks and grades. It was also about sacrifice. I skipped parties, skipped vacations, skipped moments of ease because I believed the struggle would pay off, and it did. My education became the foundation for the company I would later build. My story wasn't one of privilege. It was one of persistence. That is something people like Victoria Blackwood never understood. To her, status was inherited. To me, status was created through sweat and perseverance. My grandfather was the only person outside of my parents who believed in me without question. He was quiet, old-fashioned, the kind of man who saved every receipt and carried the same leather wallet for 30 years. Nobody knew that behind his modest lifestyle, he had been investing quietly, carefully for decades. During my senior year, he passed away. Losing him was like losing the compass of our family. But then came the shock. He left me his entire estate worth $7 million. I will never forget sitting in that lawyer's office staring at the number. $7 million. For a girl who grew up clipping coupons, it was surreal. I could have wasted it. I could have spent it on flashy cars, penthouse apartments, or vacations that proved something to people I didn't even care about. Instead, I chose differently. I invested most of it, letting it grow, and used only a small fraction to launch my tech startup and educational software company. designed to make quality resources available to students who couldn't afford expensive tutors. 2 years later, that company was valued at $2 million. My net worth had grown to $9 million. But if you had looked at me on the street, you would never have guessed it. My clothes were nice but simple, my car practical, my apartment comfortable but unremarkable. That was intentional, because I never wanted to be judged for money. I wanted to succeed or fail based on my vision and my work. Now here's where I want to pause and turn to you. Have you ever worked so hard for something that people around you still didn't notice your worth? Have you ever been underestimated because you didn't fit the image of success they expected? Share your thoughts in the comments because your story matters just as much as mine. When I met Ethan, I had already built a life I was proud of. I didn't need rescuing. I didn't need wealth to fall into my lap. What I needed was a partner who saw me for who I truly was. And that at first was exactly who he seemed to be. But before we get there, understand this. The girl his family saw as a liability was the same girl who had climbed from middle-class beginnings to a $9 million empire. And one day soon, they would learn that truth in the most unforgettable way. When my grandfather passed, I thought the biggest gift he left me was his wisdom, the lessons about patience, humility, and the power of saving for tomorrow. But then the lawyer read his will, and my entire future shifted. He had left me everything. His modest house, his carefully kept investments, and a portfolio that no one in the family even knew existed. The number felt unreal when I first heard it. $7 million. I almost laughed because how could the same man who lived in a small brick house, who drove the same sedan for 20 years, who wore the same wool coat every winter, possibly leave behind that kind of fortune? But that was who he was. Quiet, careful, wise. He played the long game while the world chased quick wins. That inheritance was not just money, it was a responsibility. I knew immediately I couldn't waste it, so I split it. Most of it I locked away in investments, keeping the same steady discipline my grandfather lived by. But a small portion I used to chase a dream. I had always wanted to make education more accessible. Growing up, I had seen classmates fall behind because they couldn't afford tutors or extra resources. I had been lucky with scholarships, but not everyone got that chance. So I created something new, a tech startup dedicated to educational software. My goal was simple build tools that gave students from middle-class families from underfunded schools the same advantages as wealthy kids with private tutors. At first it was terrifying. I poured in my savings, built a small team, and worked nights that stretched into mornings. I coded, pitched, tested, and failed more times than I can count. But slowly the pieces began to come together. By the time I was 26, the company had been valued at $2 million. Added to my investments, my net worth climbed to $9 million. But I never changed my lifestyle. I still lived in a clean but modest apartment downtown. I drove a reliable car, one that got me to meetings without breaking down, but didn't turn heads. My clothes were polished but simple. I wasn't hiding exactly. I was protecting. Because I wanted to know who loved me for me, not for the bank account they couldn't see. That decision shaped everything that came later. Because when the Blackwoods looked at me, they didn't see a woman with wealth and vision. They saw a teacher's daughter. They saw someone who should feel lucky to sit at their table. And in their arrogance, they never asked the question that mattered. Who is she really? I know some of you are wondering why keep it all a secret. Why not show them the truth from the beginning? Let me tell you. Sometimes revealing your worth too early means people stop seeing you. They see only the money, the status, the things you can provide. And I never wanted that. I wanted to test the world to see how people treated me when they thought I was ordinary. It wasn't about distrust, it was about authenticity. But in hiding my truth, I gave the Blackwoods the opening to write their own version of my story. They painted me as the outsider, the gold digger, the one who should sign away her rights just for the privilege of marrying into their empire. They were wrong, of course, and soon they would know just how wrong. Because every empire built on arrogance eventually collides with someone who refuses to kneel. And in this case, that someone was me. The wealth wasn't the victory. The victory was knowing I could fight with the very thing they worshipped most. My grandfather had prepared me for this battle long before it began. His investments became my shield. His wisdom became my weapon. And with that armor, I stepped forward into love not as someone asking for permission, but as someone ready to stand as an equal. I met Ethan on a night that should have been ordinary. A charity gala downtown, chandeliers, glowing glasses, clinking conversations swirling around causes most people only pretended to care about. I was there representing my company. We had donated software to expand access for underfunded schools, and I took pride in showing what technology could do for education. That's when I saw him, tall, dark-haired, dressed in a classic black suit that somehow looked lived in rather than performed. His eyes were warm, his smile genuine. He wasn't just another heir leaning on a last name. He was engaged. He asked real questions about the programs, about the children, about what it meant to bridge the gap between privilege and disadvantage. That's what caught me. Not his looks, not his money, his focus. We talked for hours, education inequality, hiking trails in the Midwest, our shared addiction to spicy Thai food. With him, there was no performance, no judgment, just a flow. By the end of the night, he asked for my number. I gave it to him without hesitation. Our first date was not champagne and limousines. It was a picnic in Millennium Park. He brought homemade sandwiches, slightly crushed in the basket, but perfect because they were real. We sat on a blanket and laughed at the mess while the city buzzed around us. That's who Ethan was then, simple, direct, thoughtful. From that day, we were inseparable. Weekend hikes, disasters in my kitchen when we tried cooking together. Debates that stretched until sunrise, the kind where you realize time has vanished because the person across from you feels like home. The physical connection was strong, yes, but deeper than there was respect. He admired that I was independent, that I had carved out my own space. I admired that despite being born into privilege, he carried a sense of justice into his work as a lawyer. It felt right, it felt solid, and for a long time I believed nothing could shake it. But here's the thing about love stories. They don't happen in a vacuum. You're not just marrying a person, you're marrying their history, their habits, and yes, their family. When Ethan finally introduced me to the Blackwoods, I should have paid closer attention to the chill that came with their smiles. His father, Richard, was polite but distant, speaking mostly to Ethan about cases and clients as if I wasn't in the room. His mother, Victoria, had a sharper edge. Her compliments were daggers wrapped in silk. Northwestern is a fine school, she had said over dinner. Did you find the scholarship program comprehensive and both parents are teachers? How commendable. I smiled politely, but inside I burned. Ethan either didn't notice or had grown so used to her cutting tone that he dismissed it. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself her approval didn't matter. But deep down, I knew the battle lines were already drawn. Still, I stayed focused on Ethan. He wasn't his parents. He wasn't their arrogance. He was the man who made me laugh, who challenged me, who made me believe in building a life together. And when he proposed on our 2-year anniversary on a boat gliding across Lake Michigan at sunset, I said yes, without a single doubt. The ring had belonged to his grandmother, an emerald set in gold, timeless and graceful. It wasn't flashy, it was meaningful. And in that moment I thought love was enough to eclipse the shadow of his family. But shadows always find a way to grow. Before I continue, I need to ask you something. Have you ever been in love with someone whose family didn't think you were good enough? How did you handle it? Drop your experience in the comments. And if you believe love deserves honesty more than wealth or power, make sure you subscribe to stay with this story. Because as much as I wanted to believe Ethan and I were untouchable, the truth was, his love came with an empire. And empires never give up power without a fight. And cheers I me. The first time I stepped into the Blackwood estate, I felt like I had wandered into another world. The driveway curved through manicured lawns that seemed too perfect to be real, and the mansion itself looked like something pulled from a history book. Columns, marble floors, walls lined with portraits of ancestors who had probably never lifted a finger to work a day in their lives. It was Ethan's childhood home, but to me it felt more like a museum of power. Every corner whispered the same message. This is old money. This is legacy. This is a family that expects to be obeyed. Richard greeted me with a handshake that was firm but distant, as if I were a client instead of the woman his son loved. He asked questions, but they were about politics cases and names I didn't recognize, carefully chosen topics that left me silent, excluded. Victoria was different. Her style of attack was subtle, sharp enough to sting, but soft enough to pretend innocence. Northwestern is a respectable school, she said over our first dinner together. Did the scholarship cover most of your expenses? How admirable that your parents chose teaching, such a necessary profession. I smiled politely, but my hands tightened under the table. She wasn't asking about my background. She was weighing me, measuring me, reminding me that in her eyes, I would always be the daughter of two underpaid teachers. Ethan, of course, was unfazed. He was used to this dance. He had grown up learning how to navigate his mother's sharp tongue, how to let her digs slide without confrontation. He probably thought he was protecting me by steering the conversation away, but in truth, his silence only made me feel more alone. What? Over the months, these moments multiplied. Christmas dinners where his brother asked if I planned to keep my little company after marriage. Parties where friends of the family gave me that smile, that knowing, pitying smile, like I was an outsider who had climbed above her station. And Victoria never missed a chance to remind me. When we chose the venue, she pushed for the family's country club. I wanted something smaller, more intimate, but she dismissed it. A wedding of this scale demands a certain level of presentation. When we talked flowers, she replaced my simple arrangements with towering displays that looked more like coronations than celebrations. Even the cake. I had picked one I loved, a 3-tier creation from a local bakery. Victoria called it quaint and ordered a 7-tier masterpiece from an exclusive patisserie. I let it go again and again, because at the end of the day, I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't marrying Victoria, I was marrying Ethan. And if small battles kept the peace, maybe that was worth it. But deep down I felt it, the growing sense that I was being erased, that my own wedding wasn't mine at all. The only thing I held firm on was the dress, a sleek, modern design that made me feel powerful, confident, unapologetically myself. Even then, Victoria found a way to twist it. Budget-friendly, she remarked with a smile, as if my choice wasn't about style, but about what she believed I couldn't afford. Her words stung, but I swallowed them. I told myself love was stronger than pride. I told myself Ethan and I would build our own life once the ceremony was over, away from the Blackwood orbit. But I should have recognized the truth sooner. With families like the Blackwoods, nothing is ever just a wedding. It's a negotiation, a transaction, a test of power. Let me pause here and turn to you. Have you ever felt erased by someone else's control, like your voice didn't matter in moments that should have been yours? If you know that feeling, share it in the comments, because these stories aren't just mine. They belong to anyone who's ever had to fight for their place. At the time, I clung to Ethan's promise. We would live in the condo we had chosen together downtown, close to our work, not in the Blackwood neighborhood. That vow was my anchor, the proof that no matter how loud his family became, our life would be ours. But just 3 days before the wedding, that anchor was ripped away. Victoria invited me for tea. I thought it was an olive branch. Instead, it was an ambush that would test everything: my patience, my love, and my future. And that was the day the real war began. By the time the wedding week finally arrived, I felt like a guest at my own celebration. Every decision that should have been mine had been quietly, or sometimes not so quietly, taken over by Victoria. She chose the flowers, the menu, the band. She even expanded the guest list by 50 of her personal friends. People I had never met, people who would never remember my name. It was supposed to be my day, my promise, my joy. But instead, it had turned into a performance staged by the Blackwoods, and I was the prop they placed in the spotlight. I let so much slide. When she mocked the cake I wanted, I let her replace it. When she laughed at the venue I dreamed of, I let her push her choice through. Because every time I told myself none of it matters. What matters is Ethan. What matters is our vows. What matters is the life we'll start together once all this spectacle is over. But deep inside, I felt something I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about flowers or cake. It was about erasure. About being told over and over that my voice carried no weight, that my opinions were secondary, that marrying into their family meant surrendering myself piece by piece. The only place I stood firm was the dress. I had found it months earlier, sleek and modern, a design that spoke to me, simple yet powerful. It wasn't covered in lace or dripping with diamonds. It was me. I paid for it myself, and I refused to let anyone take that choice away. Of course, Victoria tried. She didn't argue directly. Instead, she smiled and said, "Practical, budget-friendly. That's very you." The words dripped with condescension, a subtle knife designed to remind me she thought I couldn't afford more. I bit my tongue until it nearly bled, but inside I burned. Because the truth she didn't know, the truth I carried silently, was that I could have bought that entire boutique if I wanted to. I could have bought 10. But I chose the dress not because of money, but because it made me feel like myself. And wasn't that what a wedding dress was supposed to do? Still, I endured. I endured because Ethan was my focus, because I loved him, because I believed once we walked out of that church, we would finally be free. We had already agreed to live in the condo downtown. It wasn't just about location, it was about independence. A line in the sand that said, we would not be swallowed by the Blackwood Empire. That thought was my lifeline. Looking back now, I can see the pattern so clearly. Every little dismissal, every manipulation, every time I allowed myself to shrink, it was building to something bigger. They were testing how far they could push, and I was letting them push too far. 3 days before the wedding, when Victoria called and invited me for tea, I thought it was a chance to finally build a bridge. I thought maybe, just maybe, she wanted to connect. I was exhausted, hopeful, desperate for peace. So I said yes. But what waited for me in that house was not a cup of tea. It was the trap snapping shut. Before I take you there, I need to stop and ask you something. Have you ever found yourself compromising so much that you barely recognized your own reflection? Let me know in the comments, because sometimes it takes losing yourself to realize you need to fight to get it back. So, that afternoon I drove my modest car up the long driveway of the Blackwood estate, thinking I was stepping into reconciliation. Instead, I was walking into an ambush that would change everything. The war wasn't about flowers or cake anymore. It was about control, and they were about to demand the ultimate surrender. The Blackwood estate looked even more intimidating that Wednesday afternoon. The sun hit the stone facade, making it gleam like a fortress, a reminder of the wealth and power that had stood for generations. I pulled my modest car into the driveway, trying to steady my nerves. I told myself this was just tea, maybe a final gesture of kindness before the wedding. Maybe Victoria wanted to smooth things over. But the moment Marta the housekeeper led me not to the sunny garden room but to the formal sitting room, I knew something was wrong. Richard and Victoria were already there, dressed not for tea but for battle. He in a tailored gray suit, she in a navy ensemble sharp enough to cut glass. Between them sat a leather folder, thick and heavy, like a weapon waiting to be drawn. "Thank you for coming," Hannah Victoria said, her smile poised, her eyes cold. "Please sit." I lowered myself onto the sofa, feeling suddenly like a schoolgirl summoned to the principal's office. Richard wasted no time. We thought it important to settle a few matters before the wedding. He reached for the folder and slid it toward me. "This is a standard prenuptial agreement prepared by our attorney. It ensures clarity, protection, and stability for all involved." I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. "This is the first I've heard of it," I said, my voice careful. "Ethan understands the necessity," Victoria interrupted smoothly. "It is standard in our family, nothing unusual." I finally opened the document, and within minutes my stomach twisted. It was brutal, one-sided. If Ethan and I divorced, I would walk away with nothing, no property, no share in anything we built together. Worse, there were clauses about intellectual property that could entangle my company, my work, my very livelihood. "This is extremely one-sided," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Richard waved a hand dismissively. "It's standard language. You must understand, Hannah, the Blackwood legacy spans generations. We cannot allow it to be diluted." "And what about my assets?" I asked, lifting my chin. "My company, my intellectual property." Victoria's laugh was soft but sharp. "Your little software venture is charming, dear, but hardly comparable to what we're talking about here." Her words sliced through me. In that moment, I saw it all. To them, I was nothing. An outsider, a burden, a gold digger who should be grateful for whatever scraps their son might offer. Richard leaned forward, his voice firm. "We'll need your signature today. That way there will be no complications before Saturday." I placed the folder down carefully. "I will need my lawyer to review this." Both of them stiffened. "Your lawyer, Richard," said, his brows rising. "Our family attorney is among the best in Chicago." "Best for you," I countered, my voice calm but sharp. "Not for me, and as you've pointed out, our interests may not align." Victoria's smile cracked for the first time. "Hannah, everyone signs these agreements. It's a formality." "Then you won't mind if I take 24 hours to have it reviewed," I replied. Richard's tone hardened. "No, this must be resolved now. If you do not sign by 9 tomorrow morning, the wedding will be canceled." The words hit me like a slap. They weren't asking, they were commanding. It wasn't about protection, it was about power. About reminding me that in their world they dictated the rules. I stood slowly, the document clenched in my hand. My chest was tight, my heart heavy. "I'll need to speak with Ethan," I said firmly. "He knows," Victoria said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "He simply didn't want to upset you." That more than anything broke something inside me. The idea that Ethan had known, had stayed silent, had allowed his parents to ambush me. My chest constricted painfully. Richard rose, buttoning his jacket. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Your choice, the agreement or no wedding." I walked out with my head held high, the prenup heavy in my arms. But once I reached my car, the mask cracked. Tears blurred the road as I drove, their laughter echoing in my memory. I had walked into their house expecting tea. Instead, I left carrying a weapon aimed at my future. Before I go on, I want to ask you something. If you were in my shoes, faced with that ultimatum, sign away everything you've built or lose the person you love, what would you do? Let me know in the comments. Because that night, as I sat in my apartment staring at the papers, I realized something. This wasn't just about a wedding. This was about whether I would let someone else own my life. And I wasn't ready to give that away. See, That night I sat on my couch with the prenup spread across the coffee table, like a viper coiled and waiting. My apartment, usually my refuge, felt cold and unfamiliar. The words on those pages blurred as tears fell, but every time I wiped them away, the clauses stared back, each one more insulting than the last. I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head. Victoria's smug certainty, Richard's condescending dismissal, and worst of all, the revelation that Ethan knew. He hadn't told me, hadn't warned me, hadn't protected me. He had left me to walk into that ambush alone. The phone rang again. Ethan's name lit up the screen. For the fourth time, I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't hear his voice, not yet. Not until I had steadied the storm inside me. At a red light earlier on my drive home, I had nearly broken down completely. My hands shook on the wheel, and memories came flooding in. The Christmas dinner where his brother had asked whether I planned to keep my little company after marriage. The way Richard once dismissed my business model as a niche that couldn't possibly scale. Victoria's polite smile when she called my car practical. I had excused those moments, brushed them aside as misunderstandings. But now I saw them clearly for what they were, a pattern. A carefully woven narrative designed to remind me of my place. Or at least the place they thought I belonged. By the time I reached home, the tears had hardened into something sharper. Anger, determination. I picked up the phone and called the one person I trusted with everything, Jenna, my best friend since college. The moment I told her what happened, her voice exploded through the line. That's manipulative. 3 days before your wedding. Hannah, that's beyond tacky, it's predatory. Her outrage echoed my own. And the worst part, I whispered, curling into the couch cushions, is that apparently Ethan knew. He let them do this to me. Or Jenna said more carefully, they're bluffing. Maybe he didn't know they'd corner you like that. Either way, I said bitterly, it doesn't look good. Either he knew and stayed silent, or he's so powerless that his parents can threaten to cancel his wedding without him stopping them. Jenna fell quiet for a beat. So what are you going to do about the prenup? I stared at the hateful document, bile rising in my throat. I've read enough to know it's completely one-sided. There are even clauses that could touch my intellectual property. They could try to claim rights to software my company develops. Are you serious? That's outrageous. Jenna's fury matched my own. You know what you need to do, right? Call Harold. Just hearing that name steadied me. Harold Winters, my grandfather's attorney, a man with silver hair, steel in his voice, and loyalty carved into his bones. He had guided me through managing my inheritance, taught me where to invest, how to shield myself legally. If anyone could dismantle this attack, it was him. I'll call him first thing tomorrow, I promised Jenna. But before that, I need to talk to Ethan. I need to know where he really stands. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, my hand resting on the phone. Then, with a deep breath, I dialed Ethan back. He answered on the first ring. Hannah, thank God. Mom said you left upset. What happened? His voice was worried, almost panicked. But the memory of Victoria's cold smile hardened me. What happened, I said carefully, is that your parents ambushed me with a prenuptial agreement and told me if I don't sign by 9 tomorrow morning, the wedding is off. They also implied you were fully aware. Silence, long damning silence. Ethan, I pressed. I didn't know they'd confront you like that, he said finally, his voice strained. I told them I'd bring it up myself. So you did know, I said flatly. Hannah, try to understand. Every marriage in my family has a prenup. It's tradition. I was going to mention it, I just didn't want to upset you before the wedding. I laughed bitterly. So you left it to your parents to ambush me like I'm some business transaction. You call that protection. He sighed heavily, slipping into the placating tone I had heard him use with difficult clients. You're overreacting. It's just a standard document. Everyone signs them these days. Have you even read it? I snapped. Another pause. Not in detail. Dad said it was the family's standard template. I almost dropped the phone. That template ensures I walk away with nothing. It even gives your family potential claims over my company. Section 4, paragraph 3. Read it yourself. I heard rustling as he flipped through pages. Then his voice troubled some of this language. It's harsher than I realized. They gave me until 9 tomorrow, I said coldly. So tell me, Ethan, what's your position? They shouldn't have given you an ultimatum, he said quickly. Of course, the wedding isn't contingent on this. We can work it out. Then call them, I challenged. Tell them the ultimatum is off. Hannah, be reasonable. A prenup makes sense given the circumstances. There are trusts, businesses, things too complicated for you to... I cut him off. For me to understand, is that what you're about to say? His silence told me enough. Finally, I whispered, you need to decide where you stand, with them or with me. The line went quiet. I hung up before he could answer. That night, staring at the prenup on my coffee table, something shifted inside me. The sadness bled away, replaced by iron. If they wanted to make this about money and power, then fine. They were about to discover I had both. Dawn crept through my blinds the next morning, but I was already awake, staring at the ceiling. The ultimatum ticked in my mind like a clock counting down. 9 o'clock. Sign away everything or lose the man I thought I loved. But the tears from last night had dried, and in their place stood something colder. Resolve. At 6:45, I was already at my office downtown. I wore a charcoal suit, my hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, and the pearl earrings my grandfather had given me when I graduated college. They reminded me of where I came from and of the discipline that had carried me here. On the table sat the prenup, marked with sticky notes where the clauses threatened my future. At 7 sharp, Harold Winters walked in. 72 years old, sharp as a blade, with silver hair and a briefcase that had probably seen more battles than I could imagine. He gave me one look, his eyes narrowing with focus. So, tell me everything. I slid the document across to him. They ambushed me with this yesterday, told me to sign by 9 today or the wedding is off. Harold adjusted his glasses, scanning quickly. With each page, his expression darkened. By the time he set it down, he shook his head. This, he said flatly, is one of the most aggressively one-sided prenups I have seen in 45 years of practice. And I've seen plenty. Can we fight it? I asked, though my voice already carried the answer. A slow smile curved his mouth. My dear, I won't just fight it. I'll dismantle it. And then we'll draft a new agreement that protects your interests as fiercely as theirs. For the first time since that ambush, I exhaled. He pulled out a yellow legal pad. First, your position. Your net worth current, not projected. 9 million, I said simply. 7.5 in investments from my grandfather's estate. 1.5 from my company's valuation. Harold chuckled. Well then, the Blackwoods are about to have a very different conversation than the one they planned. For 2 hours we worked line by line. Harold redrafted clauses that safeguarded not only Ethan's assets, but mine. He added ironclad protection for my intellectual property. He structured property division fairly based on contribution and duration, not blind ownership. By the time we finished, we had a prenup that wasn't a weapon, but a shield balanced, just honest. Then came the strategy. You'll need to present this at the right time, Harold said, tapping the folder. First, speak with Ethan alone. If he can't stand beside you, none of this matters. If he can, then together you confront his parents. Neutral ground, never their estate. Somewhere they'll feel the weight of public civility. I nodded. I had already chosen the location, a private dining room at Lakeview Restaurant. Upscale, discreet, with enough refinement to appeal to the Blackwoods, but without giving them home court advantage. And documentation, Harold asked. I pulled out a folder from my drawer. Bank statements, investment portfolios, my company's most recent valuation. Everything updated, verified, undeniable. If they respect only money, I said, then money will speak. Harold's eyes glinted with approval. Good. Now remember, no compromises on core terms. They will push, they will posture, but you hold steady. Because this time, Hannah, you're not asking permission, you're negotiating as an equal. As he left, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the city skyline. For 3 years, I had hidden my financial truth, wanting to be loved for myself, not my wealth. But that secrecy had allowed the Blackwoods to define me, to reduce me, to underestimate me. No more. This was no longer about whether I would marry Ethan. This was about the kind of woman I would be when I did or didn't. What? And here's where I want to turn to you. If you had the chance to rewrite the rules when someone tried to trap you, would you take it? Would you risk the fallout to protect your dignity? Tell me in the comments, because your answer says more about your worth than any signature on a page. I checked my watch. 1 o'clock. That's when Ethan and I would meet. By then he would know the truth about me, about the fortune, about the fight. The Blackwoods thought they'd cornered me, but in a few hours they would realize they'd unleashed something far stronger. Me. At 1 o'clock sharp, I walked into Carlucci's, the Italian restaurant where Ethan and I had celebrated our first anniversary. It felt fitting. This place had once been our sanctuary, a reminder of simpler times. Today, it would become the battleground where I revealed who I truly was. I had chosen my armor carefully. A tailored cream blouse tucked into a fitted skirt, makeup polished but not heavy, hair smoothed into a clean blowout. And still I wore my grandfather's pearls because I wanted him with me even now. I wasn't here to dazzle Ethan. I was here to be undeniable. Ethan arrived looking exhausted. His usually perfect tie was crooked. Shadows under his eyes told me he hadn't slept. Relief crossed his face when he saw me. "Hannah," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thank you for coming. I've been worried sick." I folded my hands on the table. "Steady. We need to talk." He reached for my hand, but I pulled back. "Your parents ambushed me yesterday with a prenup. They said if I don't sign by 9 this morning, the wedding is off, and they claimed you knew." He sighed, guilt flickering across his face. "I didn't know they'd do it like that. I told them I'd talk to you myself. They blindsided you, and I'm sorry. But Hannah, every marriage in my family has a prenup. It's tradition." "Tradition," I echoed, bitterness sharp in my throat. "Tradition is forcing your fiancé to choose between her dignity and her wedding 3 days before the vows." He rubbed his forehead. "It's not meant to hurt you. It's just protection. Family trusts, businesses, things you wouldn't understand." That last phrase stung like acid. I leaned in, my voice low but strong. "Don't you dare tell me what I wouldn't understand." For a long moment, silence sat between us. His eyes searched mine, conflicted. "What do you want me to say? That I'll throw away everything my family built because you don't like a document?" "No," I said quietly. "I want you to see me as an equal, not as someone your parents can intimidate into submission." I reached into my bag, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. His brow furrowed as he opened it. "What's this?" he asked. "My truth," I replied. He flipped through the first pages: bank statements, investment accounts, valuations. At first, his face showed confusion, then shock. $7.5 million from your grandfather. He turned another page. Your company's valued at $1.5 million. I watched as realization dawned. $9 million, Ethan. That's my net worth. And I've kept it private because I wanted to be loved for me, not my bank account. He looked up at me, torn between amazement and hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to know you weren't with me for money. The same way you don't introduce yourself as Ethan Blackwood of the Chicago Blackwoods every time you shake a hand. I wanted authenticity. I wanted us." He closed the folder, slowly staring at me. "All this time, my parents thought you were after our wealth." "I know," I said. "That's the irony. They underestimated me because I chose not to flaunt what I had." For the first time in days, something shifted in Ethan's eyes: respect. Maybe even pride, but also something else. "Hannah, It feels like we both kept secrets. I should have told you about the prenup. You should have told me about this. I nodded. You're right. We both failed at honesty. But what matters now is what we do with the truth. I pulled out the second folder, the one Harold and I had prepared. This is the agreement I'm willing to sign. It protects both of us equally. Your assets, my assets, our future together, fair, balanced, respectful. He scanned the first page and I saw his lawyer's mind at work, his lips parted. This actually makes sense. This is reasonable. Not like he cut himself off shaking his head. This is what marriage should be, I said firmly. A shield for both of us, not a weapon for your parents. He reached across the table again. This time I let him take my hand. You're right. We've both hidden parts of ourselves. But if we're going to do this, it has to be as equals. No more secrets. For the first time since the ambush, I felt the ice inside me thaw. But I wasn't naive. Then we present this together, I said. Tonight, to your parents. And if they can't accept it, then maybe we need to reconsider whether this marriage is worth the cost. Ethan squeezed my hand. When I walked out of their house last night, I told them I choose you, and I meant it. Tonight we make that clear. Before I take you into that meeting, I want to ask, would you have revealed your secret at that moment, or would you have walked away, keeping your pride intact, but losing the person you loved? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your truth. That night, as I prepared for the confrontation at Lakeview Restaurant, I knew one thing for certain: the Blackwoods thought they had cornered me. But what they didn't realize was that Ethan and I were walking in together, and we weren't coming to beg. We were coming to fight. Mom, at precisely 6 o'clock that evening, Ethan and I walked into the Lakeview Restaurant. The place radiated elegance, mahogany tables, crystal chandeliers, the lake glittering outside the windows. It was neutral ground, but still upscale enough that the Blackwoods couldn't dismiss it as beneath them. We were seated in a private dining room I had reserved in advance. Only 4 place settings sat on the polished table. A single chandelier burned overhead, its light sharp as a spotlight. My heart beat steady, not from fear, but from resolve. Tonight I was not walking in as a supplicant. Tonight I was meeting them as an equal. Ethan straightened his tie. They'll be late. It's a power move. He was right. At 17 minutes past the hour, the door opened. Richard in another charcoal suit. Victoria in deep burgundy diamonds glittering at her ears. She kissed her son's cheek, ignoring me entirely before gliding to her seat with practiced grace. Richard didn't waste time. I trust you've come to a sensible decision, Hannah. 9 o'clock has come and gone. I gestured calmly toward the chairs across from us. Please sit. We have much to discuss. Something in my tone made Victoria's eyes narrow. She sat her posture perfect, her gaze sharp. Ethan began, his voice steady. We reviewed the prenuptial agreement you sent. It is unacceptable in both its terms and its approach. Richard frowned, his brows knitting. Unacceptable. It is the standard Blackwood family agreement. Both your siblings signed identical versions without complaint. Their circumstances were different, Ethan replied firmly. They married people with comparable backgrounds. The power dynamics were equal. That is not the case here. Victoria's lips curled. Power dynamics. Ethan, this is not a sociology lecture. This is about protecting our family. That I said, my voice calm but sharp, is why we have prepared an alternative agreement. One that protects both families equally. I placed the folder on the table and slid it across. Richard's jaw tightened, but he picked it up and began to flip through. Victoria leaned back dismissive. Your little software venture hardly requires the same level of protection as generations of Blackwood wealth. I opened my portfolio and laid out documents in neat rows. Bank statements, investment accounts, my company's valuation. You might be surprised, Mrs. Blackwood. My net worth currently stands at approximately $9 million, 7.5 from investments, 1.5 from my company. The silence was delicious. Richard froze mid-page. Victoria's face flushed crimson. That is impossible, she snapped. You drive a 5-year-old car. Your parents are teachers. I value responsibility over vanity, I said evenly. My parents taught me that wealth is measured not in displays, but in discipline. Lessons that served me well. Richard studied the statements, his lawyer's eyes narrowing. These appear legitimate. His voice had lost its earlier arrogance. Victoria sputtered. Why conceal this? Why keep it a secret from your future family? Would you have treated me with respect if you had known I asked? Her silence was answer enough. Ethan leaned forward. Mom, Dad, the issue is not just the prenup. It's how you've handled this entire situation. Threatening to cancel our wedding if she didn't comply, that isn't protection. That's coercion. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Victoria tried again, her voice sharp, but less certain. Darling, we only wanted to protect you. No, Ethan said firmly. You wanted control. That ends now. I turned their attention back to the document. This agreement safeguards both sides. It protects Blackwood assets, and it protects mine. It divides property fairly based on contribution and time. And it ensures that my intellectual property remains mine, just as your business interests remain yours. Richard closed the folder slowly. His expression had softened into something I hadn't seen before: respect. We will need our attorneys to review it, he said carefully. You have until 3 tomorrow afternoon, I replied. The wedding is in 2 days. This must be resolved before then. Victoria's mouth tightened. She was unused to deadlines imposed on her, but Richard placed a hand on her arm. We'll review it, he said finally. I nodded. That's fair. As fair as giving me less than 24 hours to review yours. For the first time, Victoria had no retort. Mon la. The morning after our confrontation at Lake View, I woke with a strange mix of nerves and calm. The nerves came from knowing that Richard and Victoria would be dissecting every line of the counter-agreement with their lawyers. The calm came from something new: certainty. For the first time, I felt I had taken control of my own narrative. By 3 o'clock, just as promised, we met again. This time not in their mansion, not in my office, but in a neutral downtown law firm conference room. The table was long, the walls lined with shelves of leather-bound books, the kind of space where battles were fought quietly but decisively. Richard was already there, a stack of papers before him, his lawyer seated beside him. Victoria sat rigid, her diamond-clad fingers gripping a pen like a weapon. Their attorney, an older man with sharp eyes, cleared his throat as we entered. Ethan and I sat side by side, our hands clasped under the table. For once he wasn't trying to soothe or distract. He was ready to stand with me. Richard spoke first. We have reviewed your proposal. Some of the terms are unusual. But fair, Ethan interjected before I could open my mouth. His voice was steady, calm, but unyielding. That's what matters. The lawyer slid a marked-up version across the table. I scanned the changes. Small clarifications, some rewording, but the fundamentals remained intact. My assets were protected, my intellectual property untouchable, property division balanced. I looked up, meeting Richard's eyes. He gave the faintest nod. Businessman to businesswoman, equal. Victoria, however, was not ready to surrender. Her voice was cool but brittle. I find it odd that you concealed such substantial assets, Hannah. Trust is the cornerstone of marriage. Surely you can understand our concern. I leaned forward, my voice calm but edged with steel. And I find it odd that 3 days before my wedding, I was ambushed with an ultimatum that demanded I sign away everything I've built. Surely you can understand my concern. Her cheeks flushed. For a moment I thought she might lash out. But then, to my surprise, her expression shifted, softer, almost reflective. My husband's grandmother, she began slowly, was the daughter of a factory worker. She married into this family against fierce opposition. People said she was beneath us, But during the Depression, it was her determination and shrewdness that saved the Blackwood business. Without her, there would be no empire to protect. The room fell silent. Even Richard glanced at her, startled. Victoria met my eyes. "I may have misjudged you. Perhaps I was too quick to see only what I expected." She took a breath, then added, "For that I owe you an apology. It wasn't flowery, it wasn't perfect, but for Victoria it was monumental." I held her gaze and answered softly, "And perhaps I should have trusted Ethan with my truth sooner. We both made mistakes. What matters is how we move forward." Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but no longer a sneer. "Progress, if not peace." Richard tapped the table. "Then it's settled. The revised agreement stands, signed by both parties before the wedding." Harold, who had joined us quietly, leaned back with a satisfied smile. A fair outcome for all involved. When the papers were signed, I felt a weight lift, not just because my assets were safe, but because we had rewritten the rules. No longer supplicant, no longer outsider, equal. Later that night, as Ethan and I sat together in our condo, I asked him, "Do you think your mother meant it, the apology?" He squeezed my hand. "It's a start. And honestly, even if she didn't, it doesn't matter. What matters is us. That we stood our ground together." For the first time, I believed him completely. Frey, before I go further, I want to pause. What would you have done in that room? Accepted Victoria's apology at face value or demanded more? Share your thoughts below, and if you believe in standing tall no matter who underestimates you, make sure you're subscribed. Because this story isn't done yet. 2 days later, on the morning of my wedding, Victoria appeared at my door. Not dressed in armor this time, but in pale blue. And in her hand she carried a small velvet box. Inside lay sapphire earrings that had once belonged to Ethan's great-grandmother, the woman who had defied tradition, saved the Blackwood fortune, and proved herself more powerful than anyone expected. In that moment, I understood the message. Victoria wasn't just handing me jewelry. She was acknowledging that, like that woman before me, I had carved my place in this family, and I intended never to let it be taken away. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear sunlight spilling through the tall windows of my suite at the Drake Hotel. For months I had dreaded this day, not because of Ethan, but because of the circus his family had created. And yet as I slipped into my sleek modern dress, I felt different. Lighter, stronger. The weight of silence was gone. Jenna fussed with my veil, her eyes shimmering. "You look stunning, Hannah. But it's more than the dress. There's something different about you today." "Confidence," my mother said softly from the corner, arranging the train. My daughter finally stopped hiding her light. They were right. The woman in the mirror wasn't the same woman who had once shrunk under Victoria's cutting remarks. This woman had fought, revealed her truth, and refused to be erased. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. To my surprise, it was Victoria. Dressed not in commanding burgundy, but in pale blue, her tone uncharacteristically gentle. "May I have a moment alone with Hannah?" My mother and Jenna exchanged glances before stepping out. Victoria approached slowly, her eyes sweeping over me. "You make a beautiful bride." Her voice trembled slightly, as if the words cost her something. "Thank you," I replied, guarded but open. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small velvet box. These belonged to Ethan's great-grandmother. She was the daughter of a factory worker who married into the family against fierce opposition. And when the Depression nearly ruined us, she saved the business. She was underestimated just like you. Inside lay sapphire earrings glimmering with history. She fastened them onto my ears herself, her hands surprisingly steady. Something old, something blue, and perhaps a peace offering. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw no disdain, only recognition. "Ethan loves you deeply. That should have been enough for me. I hope you can forgive me for not seeing it sooner. It wasn't perfect, but it was real." We've both learned something about assumptions and appearances, I said softly. Moving forward matters more than what's behind us. She nodded, emotion flickering across her face. At the door she paused. Welcome to the family, Hannah. Truly. When she left, I touched the earrings. They weren't just jewelry. They were a symbol that I had fought for my place and earned it. Minutes later, my father arrived, eyes misty. My brilliant girl, he whispered, pride heavy in his voice. Ready to start this new chapter? More than ready, I said, my chest swelling. The ceremony was everything I had once dreamed of, even with 200 guests. When I walked down the aisle and saw Ethan's eyes full of love unwavering, it felt as if the world disappeared. Our vows, simple and traditional, carried the weight of every battle we had fought to get here. And to my surprise, as I glanced at Victoria during the vows, I saw her wiping tears. At the reception, the shift was undeniable. Richard introduced me to his business associates not as Ethan's fiancé, but as the founder of a successful educational software company. Victoria seated me beside her oldest friend, a federal judge whose approval clearly mattered to her. The condescension was gone, replaced with interest, and dare I say, respect. Ethan leaned close during our first dance, whispering, "Amazing what 9 million can do for one's social standing." I smiled, but my answer was firm. It's not about the money, it's about respect, and demanding it. He kissed my temple. Either way, I've never been prouder to call you my wife. That night, under the glow of chandeliers and the hum of laughter, I realized something profound. I hadn't just married Ethan. I had married into a legacy and rewritten my place within it. But let me ask you, do you believe respect has to be earned through proving your worth, or should it be freely given, especially in love? Drop your thoughts below, because this is the question that shaped not just my wedding day, but my future. As the music swelled and we twirled across the floor, I felt the sapphire earrings brush my neck. A reminder, a promise, that from this day forward I would never again shrink to fit someone else's expectations. Because I wasn't just Ethan's wife, I was Hannah, equal, powerful, unapologetic. Our beach. 6 months after the wedding, life finally settled into a rhythm that felt like ours. Not the Blackwoods. Not the staged spectacle of society dinners, ours. We bought a house together, one we both chose in a neighborhood we loved. No sprawling estate, no golden gates, just a home with light in the mornings, and a garden I could actually touch with my own hands. For the first time since the proposal, I felt like I was living in my own story again. But the Blackwoods, of course, didn't disappear. Family legacies rarely retreat quietly. Victoria began dropping hints about a family tradition of Sunday dinners, every week without fail. The expectation was clear now that I carried their name. I was to fall into line. Ethan surprised me. He looked me in the eye and said, "Once a month, no more." I blinked. "Your mother won't accept that." "She doesn't have to," he answered simply. "We set the rules for our marriage, not them." And to my amazement, Victoria conceded. Maybe she realized this new balance was healthier for all of us. Or maybe she finally understood that pushing harder would only drive us further away. Richard's acceptance came in quieter, more practical ways. When his law firm began exploring a technology upgrade, he invited me to consult. Not as Ethan's wife, but as a professional. And when my company secured a major contract with the Chicago Public Schools, he sent a congratulatory note, professional, yes, but warm. Progress, I thought. Still, the signed prenup sat locked in a safe deposit box. Untouched, untested. And yet its true power had never been about enforcement. It was about the process. The act of demanding fairness, of drawing a line, of refusing to be erased. That document wasn't just a contract, it was proof that my marriage had been forged on equal footing. Ethan and I began making financial decisions as a team. He handled what he knew best, legal structures, trusts, contracts. I brought my experience in business strategy and technology. Neither of us dominated, neither surrendered. For the first time, I saw what real partnership looked like. But more than money, more than boundaries, it was the honesty that mattered. We had stripped away the secrets mine and his and faced each other as whole people, vulnerable, strong, equal. One evening, as we sat in the garden of our new home, Ethan asked, "Do you regret any of it? The fights, the drama, the tears?" I thought about it for a long time, about Victoria's ultimatum, Richard's arrogance, the nights I cried until my chest hurt, about the way Ethan had wavered the moments I thought I might lose him, and about the transformation that followed. "No," I said finally, "because it forced us to build a foundation that's real. Without that fire, maybe we'd still be pretending, and pretenses don't last." He nodded his hand, finding mine. "We're stronger now, because of it." I squeezed his hand, because we chose truth. And that, I realized, was the lesson I carried. You can't build a life by hiding pieces of yourself. Secrets rot foundations. Love requires both vulnerability and strength, the courage to reveal who you are, and the fortitude to demand respect for it. To the Blackwoods, wealth had always been power. To me, wealth had always been freedom. When they saw me as powerless, they tried to control me. When they discovered my truth, they were forced to reckon with it. But I never wanted power over them. I wanted equality beside Ethan, and I got it. So if you're listening to this story, let me leave you with this. Don't ever sign away your worth, just to keep someone else comfortable. If you've ever stood your ground against people who underestimated you, share your story in the comments. And if you want more tales of turning tables and reclaiming power, subscribe, because these are the stories that remind us who we can be. The Blackwoods still live in their fortress by the lake. We still see them sometimes, but in our home, our marriage, our life, our rules hold, not theirs. And every time I catch the glint of those sapphire earrings in the mirror, I remember I was not invited into this family. I claimed my place, on my terms. When I look back on that whirlwind week, the ambush, the ultimatum, the tears, the confrontation, I no longer see it as a nightmare. I see it as a crucible, a fire that burned away illusions and forced me to stand in the full strength of who I am. It would have been easier to sign the papers, swallow my pride, and go through with the wedding quietly. It also would have been easier to storm out, slam the door, and never look back. But the harder choice, the braver one, was to confront the truth. To reveal what I had kept hidden, not to boast, but to demand fairness. To tell the Blackwoods and Ethan that love is not submission. Love is equality. That's the part I want you to carry with you. When people underestimate you, when they corner you into choices that strip away your dignity, you have the power to stand firm. You don't need $9 million. You don't need a legendary attorney. What you need is conviction, the certainty that your worth is not negotiable. Ethan and I still face challenges. His family will always be his family. There will always be moments when tradition and expectation collide with the life we're building. But now the foundation is different, stronger, because we started not by surrendering, but by standing side by side. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. The most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be less than who you are. And if this story touched something inside, you don't let it stop here. Subscribe, share it with someone who needs courage today, and join me for the next story of transformation and truth. Because sometimes the hardest battles lead to the strongest beginnings.